Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at our second keynote session of the day as part of Edinburgh's Business Festival. My name's Emma Reid, so I am the Head of Engagement and Marketing here at the Edinburgh Chamber, but also wearing a second hat today as I'm also local president of JCI Edinburgh. JCI Edinburgh is the Junior Chamber of Commerce in Edinburgh, and we're a membership organisation which offers development opportunities for people aged 18 to 40 in the city. For those of you that have joined other sessions as part of the festival, I hope you have enjoyed them so far and you have learned something from them. As you know, this year our theme is moving forward with purpose, so we are exploring that through various different workshops, keynote sessions and panel discussions. I'm delighted to be joined today by our keynote speaker, Zoe Kantounatou. Before I introduce Zoe and tell you a little bit more about her, I'd just like to remind you that we will have time for Q&A after Zoe's presentation. So please do pop your questions as you think of them into the Q&A box during the presentation. And then after Zoe has spoken, we will come and answer those questions and pose them to Zoe. So please remember to do that, and we'll hope to have some great questions by the end of the presentation. So Zoe is a co-founder and CFO at FutureX, which is a learning and community platform that educates and upskills entrepreneurs who want to build better businesses. Over the past 10 years, Zoe has worked across Scotland, India, Greece, and Silicon Valley, working together with more than 1,000 entrepreneurs. In Scotland, FutureX has delivered some of the biggest entrepreneurial conferences, Startup Summit and Impact Summit, with hundreds of participants attending every year. Zoe is also a trained facilitator and a coach, and she has extensive experience in running personal development and leadership workshops and programs around the world. Zoe is actually joining us today from Silicon Valley, so it's been a very, very early start. She's got a coffee in hand, which I think is much needed. So we really appreciate you joining us and look forward to hearing your presentation. And I'll hand over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emma. I'm very, very excited to be here. As Emma said, yes, I am joining from Silicon Valley. I'm in San Mateo at the moment. We are running a program. We have some tech founders from Scotland that we brought here to introduce them to the ecosystem. So it's quite early for me, but I know you had an amazing day already. Emma caught me up in some of the things that you discussed. So I hope that my presentation can shed a bit of light into some of those things you've been talking about. And I can't wait to hear your questions at the end and have a discussion with you. So I'll share a few things. Emma gave a very good introduction of who I am, but I'm Zoe Kantounatou. I'm a co-founder of FutureX, and we are building a global educational platform to transform the way that businesses start, grow, and thrive. We're building a community of purpose-driven entrepreneurs to give you the support that you need. And we're very passionate about, and I'm personally very passionate about redefining the role of business and how businesses can operate in a way that is inclusive and has a positive impact in the world. In my presentation, I will kick off to tell you a bit about my journey, what brought me to where I am today, what brought me to make that my mission in the world, and then share a few things with you, the things that I've learned along the way of running a business, running a purpose-driven business for 10 years, and some of the learnings that I think might be relevant for you. So if you picked up on my surname, I'm not from Scotland. I'm originally from Greece, from Thessaloniki, which is the picture from. And in 2006, I went to uni to study accounting and finance. And it was brilliant. I was learning quite a lot. I was getting involved in organizations, talking about leadership and understanding the issues that we're facing in the world, and already starting forming that idea of the things that are happening around me and what my impact I want my impact to be. And then in 2008, the economic crisis hit. And for those who don't know, Greece was very badly hit by the crisis. And it was a fascinating time to be studying finances, because we would come in the morning, we'll sit down with our professors, we'll pick up the newspaper and we'll talk about what's happening. And it was daily change, talking about the measures, talking about the new things. And I remember that at the time, the news would say that it will take about 5 years for the crisis to go away, which seemed like an insane period of time. And we're all sad, and it was kind of like, it felt like impossible. And professors will come in and say, no, that's a mistake. It will actually take 30 years for the crisis to go away. So you're actually the lost generation. By the time the crisis goes away, you'll be retired. So, you're not going to have a career. But let's move on now and focus on our course for the day. So let's talk about your role as financial advisors, which is to maximize the profit for the shareholders and making sure that a small group of people will kind of like make more money and businesses become more profitable. And I remember sitting there being annoyed about that, thinking that, okay, let's accept that I'm a lost generation, which I don't in particular do, but shouldn't we be having a conversation about how the system we've created has failed us? How all this led to an economic crisis that means that I'm a lost generation. Should we be talking about what we can do for the generation after us and making sure that they have a future? So this is how I started forming this thought about, is there anything we can do with that? Is there a way we can start redefining what the role of businesses are in the world? Keeping the same system, keeping the same vehicle, because it's a very powerful vehicle business, but is there a way we can operate in a different capacity? So in 2011, I moved to Stirling in Scotland, and I did my master's on socioeconomic development, and I learned about alternative forms of business. And I was fascinated to hear about cooperatives and social enterprises. But for me, it was something that was missing. And that was that, yes, it was great to create a new legal system and new frameworks, but it was feeling that there is another side, the side that we've already built, that we need to do more about. So I finished my master's and I was very eager to see what can we do with businesses that are for profit to help them understand and shift the mindset in having a better impact in the world. So in 2013, I joined the company. I was the first employee, and they were running retreats all over the world, helping entrepreneurs reconnect with their purpose. And it was such an exciting time. When I joined the company, they didn't have money to pay my salary. So I fundraised my own money to be able to hand it back into the company and say, you know what, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of the mission. I want to be employed here. This meant that very quickly, a year later, I became a director and I was running the business. And it was very exciting as we were taking entrepreneurs all over the world and we were helping them reconnect with their why. Why do you do what you do? What matters to you? What is the change that you want to see in the world? And then getting them in the right mindset to be able to go back to their businesses and lead in a different way, coming from a different place. And I'm doing that for like 4 years, 5 years. It was amazing. Met some brilliant entrepreneurs who wanted to do amazing problems, solve some of the biggest problems in the world. But what I started feeling was that, yes, we talk about mindset. Yes, we talk about purpose, but actually we don't give people, entrepreneurs, the tools they need to go back into their business and change their business. If they go back and they face exactly the same problems that they were facing before. They're facing the same challenges where you're talking about cash flow and managing your products and the human resources challenges. And all we give them is this great idea of like, this is what you want to do. So at the same time, my current co-founder, Bruce Walker, was running another business, and he was doing some of the biggest events in Scotland and talking to entrepreneurs, talking about startups, connecting them with networks like here in Silicon Valley, talking about sales and marketing and investment, how you can do all those different elements. And we ended up in a train journey together from Glasgow, talking about where we are and what our businesses are doing. And we realized that he was actually looking into purpose-driven businesses are the future. I want to understand how I can bring more of this into the work that I'm doing through our events and programs. And that's when we said, you know what, it makes sense for us to bring the companies together and bring that element so we can find ways to balance that profit and purpose and how you run a business, but how you run a business in a different way. So that's when we built FutureX, and we believe that everyone should have access to the world-class tools and networks and resources to succeed in business. And we want to help purpose-driven companies empower the founders to get everything they need to build big companies that are profitable, that are making money, but they also have a positive impact in the world. Since we launched FutureX in 2017, we have worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs through our big events, Impact Summit and Startup Summit, and of course through our educational courses. as I was saying, we've been doing our Silicon Valley program every year before the pandemic. This is the first time that we managed to come back, getting entrepreneurs to come here, expand their mindset, expand their networks, and go back in Scotland and build different businesses. But something that we've always been very proud of is that we, alongside other organizations, have shifted the conversation in Scotland, bringing the movement of purpose-driven business into the forefront. When I started talking about this 10 years ago, no one in Scotland knew what purpose-driven business was. No one knew what running a business with impact was. And it's amazing for me to be sitting here today, 10 years later, being an event when everyone is talking about this and everyone's actually learning big ways to do that. So, as I said, I've been running this business for 10 years, and there are a couple of things that I have learned along the way that I wanted to share with you. The first one would be, you will not always get it right or do the right thing. So as a business, we're facing exactly the same, like as a purpose-driven business, we're facing exactly the same challenges that every other business faces. Raising money and cash flow and selling and HR problems. But what happens is that for us, when we're building a purpose-driven business, we had this big idea of how we want the business, what we want the business to look like. What is our big vision? What do we want to achieve? And that means that you end up getting caught up between impossible choices. Or sometimes for myself, as trying to build a utopia from day one. I want to achieve this and I wanted to do it now. So there's a lot of things that we tried into this business that eventually realized were not a good idea. We're not in the right stage to do that. For example, very early on, we introduced an unlimited number of holidays because that's what we wanted to do for employees, which was great. And we kept doing that, and I will definitely recommend it. But we did that because that's what we wanted to do, with the naivety that comes that that's a great thing. And I will never forget the first time that an employee left the company, resigned to go to another opportunity, and they came and said, "Okay, great. Now, how much am I going to get of holiday pay with my last check?" And you would say, "Okay, how do we calculate that? Our contract says you have an unlimited number of holidays." So there was all this good initiative that we wanted to do. We were doing a 4-day working week. But at the beginning, we didn't have the accountability systems in place and the processes systems in place to make sure that the 4-day working week is actually helping the business. So what I've learned through that is that you will not always get it right or do the right thing, but running a purpose-driven business is a journey. It's a journey of, this is what I want to achieve. This is what I think I want this business to look like. I want my product to look like. I want to be net zero. I want to make sure that I'm sustainable. I want to make sure that I help the local communities. But there is a journey to get there. And there is a journey of a lot of try and error and a lot of mistakes. Well, which leads me to the second learning, which was embrace failure. Every time I come to Silicon Valley, this is a big thing that we hear. And it always reminds me how much I want us in Scotland to do the same thing. Here, failure is a badge. Is something that people are proud of. Not failure for the sake of failure, failure that you've learned from. We always hear that investors tend to invest to companies that have failed, to founders that have failed venture before. And they trust these founders more than people who haven't done that. And obviously we know that in Scotland, the UK, the perception is not the same. But what it meant for us as a business is that we had this fear of failure, of saying the wrong thing, a culture of perfectionism inside the business when we actually were not trying new things. We were afraid to get outside of our comfort zone and push the boundaries of what we wanted to do and what we wanted to achieve, because we wanted everything to be perfect before we get into that. And that meant a lot of times that other people were able to move faster, and we missed a lot of opportunities to be able to create change. Other people copied what we're doing. And for me, now that we're starting embracing this culture of experimentation, of trying things out, of putting things out there and see how they go, not wanting to be perfect, not being afraid to push boundaries, how we see a massive difference in the results of our work. If you're running a purpose-driven business, you will have to push for what you think is right. Years ago, we had some very challenging times in the business when we had to make a very difficult decision, and we needed our lawyers and accountants to come to that to find a way for us to understand how we're going to solve this. And it was something that we've never faced before. We didn't have the experience. We're first-time founders. And we're sitting there going to our mentors, going to our advisors, going to everyone. And it became a very difficult situation because what we thought was right based on our values was not what people were telling us to do. And with the experience that comes with, we've never had this happening to us before. We never had that particular situation to solve before. It was quite a tricky position to be because on one hand, we wanted to focus on what people were telling us and do that. On the other hand, we really wanted to stick to what we believe. And I'm really glad because we really pushed for what was right. And what that made us realize is that eventually you will need to work with people who understand what matters to you and your business and the way you see the world, so they can actually advise you in the best way. We've seen a big change in support organizations understanding companies better and not just coming with, this is the thing that was always being done. But it's still quite tricky when you have this big vision of what you want to achieve and the way you want to achieve it, to find the people that can help you do that in the best way possible for you and for them. Develop a good support system with like-minded people. We all know that running a business can be lonely. You're facing with challenges that sometimes other people don't know, other people who know in business don't know. And also there's a lot of things that you cannot share. You cannot share with people, you cannot share outside this business. And it's something that is so ingrained in you that you keep thinking it's something that you cannot get out of your system. However, for me, running a purpose-driven business can be a bit lonelier than that. Exactly because you need people who can also understand where you're coming from, what is important to you, why sometimes you will sacrifice the short-term profit for the long-term impact you can have. Why are you need to make a different decision to be able to go to where you want to go? For example, we have companies that come to us and say, I want to raise investment. I really need to raise investment. I really need to raise this money if I want my business to grow. I'm really in that position. I found these investors, but they don't have the same values as me. And that is a very difficult position to be because you're putting your values against the future of your business. And then you need this good support system of like-minded people to be able to guide you through that, to be able to support you and say, you know what, in that particular instance, probably you regret getting this money eventually. And the last thing I want to share with you in terms of the learnings is that be authentic and transparent. I've seen a lot of companies being terrified to communicate the purpose, to really embrace that because of cancel culture, because we've seen what happens when one company gets it wrong and suddenly it's all over in the public space. And if you're running a business for many years and you've already established, it's quite difficult to make that leap. A lot of people will accuse of greenwashing. They will accuse of you using that for marketing. They will accuse you of, oh, you say that, but you're doing something else. And that will happen. And you need to embrace that and be prepared about that because that will be the case. In some instances, for example, we're running our big events and we wanted an event to be very environmentally friendly. So we're starting only serving vegetarian food, which stopped printing material. When, of course, we're doing things in person, we're trying to do that. However, our lanyards were plastic when we're putting the name badges. And at the same time as who we are as a business, we really wanted to make sure that we care for the people that work with us. So we had made the decision that all the volunteers that come and join us for the day, they will be paid and they will be paid the living wage for the hours that we're spending with us. So when you look at that from a business perspective, you're like, I have a limited budget, I have a limited amount of money that I can spend on this event to make business sense for me to keep doing this event and make that profit. And with this limited budget I have, I can choose only one or the other in that instance. So I can either pay the volunteers or I can either pay more to get lanyards that are compostable and what that is. And so you make that choice. And we had people, we made the choice in that instance to focus on the volunteers and make sure they're paid. But at the same time, we were accused during the events. People will come and say, you're a fraud. You're talking about who you are. You're talking about sustainability. But look, your lanyards are not that, or the cups were not that. And at the beginning, that can be very intimidating, being told that, what you stand for is not good enough, that you failed. But in a way, this is the world we're living in. And for me, being authentic and transparent, be like, you know what? Yes, it was a difficult choice to make. We thought about this, but this was the best thing we can do at that time. This is a journey for us, and we will keep going forward and we'll be doing better. So to summarize the learnings is that for me, purpose-driven business, the only thing that makes it different from any other business is that it's not only about what you do, it's how you do it. It's how you make decisions. And what are the things that come to your mind when you're making a decision? What are the variables that you look at? Are you just looking about money and profit? Is that thing going to be profitable for me? Or are you taking into account everything else? The environment, the local communities, the people you employ, and then looking at all these different options, the values, the world that you want to achieve, your mission. Are you thinking about the short term or the long term? And thinking about all those things, you make the best choice you can at that time that feels the best for what you want to achieve in your business. And that is all you can do running a purpose-driven business. So I know I can see there's a few questions in the Q&A, and I would love to spend some time talking about this. So I will close off with, a lot of people come to me and say, with the work that we do, say, that's amazing, but how do I find my purpose? How do I find what I want to be doing through my business, through myself? And I wanted to share these two questions with you because that has been very helpful for me. The first one is, what will the world look like when you succeed? And for me, for example, is this idea that all businesses will operate in a way that they're thinking about the impact they have in the world, and they want the impact to be positive and solve some of the world's biggest problems. But this is a good question to start thinking about. That's what I'm trying to do in my business. We want to make sure that the people who work with us are happy and thriving, and every day they come to work, they're excited to be here because we treat them well. Or we want to have a business that supports the local community and employs local people. And we have companies who are in the Highlands, and they say, we just want to make sure that our young people won't leave and they will stay here because there will be opportunities for them, whatever that is. The second question is, what makes you come alive? And for me, that question helps you understand how are you going to achieve the purpose that you want to achieve. There's many ways that I can achieve my purpose. I could go into government. I could go into a PhD, into research and trying to implement changes through that. I can go to the big industries that I think they're harming the most and try to educate them. But what makes me come alive is talking to people, is coaching people, is sitting with someone and having this conversation and seeing in their minds that understanding their potential, or having something click and be like, okay, this is what I can be doing. So this is why I chose to do the work that I do. So I hope that was helpful. I'm very interested to hear your questions and have a discussion with you. This is where you can connect with me. And of course, please drop an email if you want to take this conversation further. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoe. That was a really, really interesting presentation. And I think lots to take away from that. I know we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so we'll come to them. I've actually got a question of myself also to throw into the mix there, but if anyone else has any questions, please do pop them into the Q&A and we will be coming to them shortly. The first question from myself is actually our last session just before this was with STV, and it was all around communicating your purpose with customers through your marketing and advertising activity. Something that was raised there was actually they showed an example of Microsoft's purpose statement, which actually was quite surprising to some of us on the call, which is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And that's a more kind of up-to-date statement versus one of their older ones, for example, which was a computer on every desk in every home. So the more current version's obviously a lot more gentle. It seems to be more socially driven. So they've changed tact in the way that they're operating and the way they're kind of communicating. So I know that you've worked a lot with kind of smaller businesses who may have started out being purpose-driven or have started that out very early days. But if you were a more traditional business, or maybe a business that traditionally hasn't been purpose-driven and you're looking to become more purpose-driven, how could they go about that, and how could they do that in an authentic way?
Yes, definitely. I think it's very exciting what you're saying about Microsoft and kind of like how they've changed. We see that here, being in Silicon Valley now, how companies are embracing that. There is a shift in the conversation. Either way, it's a consumer-driven conversation. in that sense. We have the newest generations that are becoming a lot more aware of these issues, and we expect the companies to behave in that way. So, it's very vital for that to happen. I feel for me, when the traditional, if you've been running a business for many years, what I would say in a more authentic way is do some reflection first of what do you want the world to look like and what exactly do you want to achieve. What we face sometimes is that big companies be like, oh, I need to do this because that is what is needed for me. I need to communicate it as a marketing exercise. And what they do is they're trying to find a way to fit into the conversation, but that will lose the authenticity of what you're trying to do. The idea is go first and say, what is the first thing that we would like to achieve? What is the big change that we can bring into the conversation? And then find a way for you to build that internally. I always believe the change comes from the inside. So it's not about building the marketing campaign first and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Is that internally, how do we embody that? For me, finding your purpose and then finding your values is a big thing. We know that traditionally that's happening. A lot of big companies and a lot of companies that are going on for years have their values. However, we say that sometimes you go into there and you see the value being the name of the room, and the board meeting is the name of the value rather than actually being used. What we say is that go through your values and make sure this is how you make decisions. And that is the starting point. Once you're starting doing that, then you start understanding where you stand in the world and then being able to say, okay, how does that look externally? How does that look through our product? And starting becoming this journey that you can expand.
Great, thank you. So I will stop hogging and I'll go to the questions that have come through from our participants. So the first question that's come through is, how can we inspire the next generation of leaders to be more purpose-driven?
Very important to do so. I would say for me, it's always role models. Like for me, the inspiration comes from role models. Personally growing up in Greece, I never thought I would run a business because I've never seen anyone running a business. Or when I started thinking about purpose-driven business, that was never done before. And I knew that the traditional way of running a business was not for me. So for me, role models would be that idea. I feel there's so much more we can do in education. So I would love to see more entrepreneurs who are purpose-driven going into schools, going into these places and actually tell people this is how we do it. What we find is that people want that relatable role models. So it's not just kind of like having the same person all the time saying that. Everyone has a very powerful story to share. And being able to share the story with the next generation is what can create these entrepreneurs that can find ways to be more purpose-driven. And of course, the generation of leaders, we see that even now happening in the world when there's different leadership styles being compared and how we tend to go more towards the purpose-driven leadership styles.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Our second question, quite a big question, quite a tough one, I guess, but very important, is a purpose-driven economy needs to be inclusive and it needs to promote equality. How can we all as leaders, entrepreneurs, I guess as individuals as well, ensure that we're engaging with the harder to reach groups so that we can genuinely create an environment where everyone can thrive?
Extremely important and very true. A couple of things that come to my mind. The first one is we need to be aware of our own assumptions. So for me, sometimes we come with our own assumptions, how we do things, what is right, what is wrong. So the first one is coming from a point of view of listening and understanding, going to these groups, going to the people who work with these groups, making sure that we don't just generalize and go and say, this is what is needed, go and bring that to the conversation. But the second thing that we've done in events, and I found that very interesting, is that at some point we made a pledge and we said, we want to have 30%, like in our speakers, we want to make sure that they're diverse. So we start with 30%, like 50-50, at least 50-50 gender balance, and 30% from diverse backgrounds. And we knew that that's a journey. We knew that it wasn't good enough, but we wanted to make sure that we do that. And for me, what happened at that moment is that the first year we achieved it because it became part of the discussion. It wasn't something nice to have, that eventually we were speaking to people and we go to the event, it's like, oh, we tried, but we didn't make it, because we proactively going through that. So for me, it's this idea of how can we proactively set the scene to be able to go and reach with these groups and genuinely care about creating that environment. I think what is important for me is to make sure that we create this environment that people, like the business world that we want to see, and how can we break down the boundaries? Sometimes I feel we all working in isolation And say, how can we break down the boundaries to help that? It's a big question. I'm not sure how much I answered your question, because obviously if we manage to do that, the world would definitely be a better place. But for me, there's two things is that, it's like thinking about our own assumptions, checking our own assumptions, checking where we come from, our biases, what we think, what is right and wrong, not trying to speak for other people, but listen to what they have to say. And at the same time, proactively put things in place and measures in place and metrics that can help us know that we are achieving this, rather than say, I want to do this, and then thinking that it will happen by its own, on its own.
Yeah. No, it's a very big question. There's no kind of one right answer, but I think it kind of ties in with your point earlier about being relatable and having relatable role models for these groups. And it was also brought up in our last session, is that people don't like somebody coming in and telling them how it should be, or telling them what it should be, but it's actually having more of a kind of consultative approach, and just going out and speaking to people to really understand what their needs and their wants are and how we can work together. Yes. Rather than just assuming, oh, we know best, so we'll come in and this is how it should be done. So yeah, definitely very important. We have another question that's come through. So it is, how do you recommend that you can empower your team within your purpose-driven plans? Get everybody on board with it.
Yes. My experience is that normally, like, teams want to work with people that have this big purpose. Like, they're working with companies because they want to create a change. So if you communicate to them, they're normally on board. They like that. For me, in order to do that, it's not a top-down approach. It's not like, oh, this is the purpose, this is where we're going. It's about opening up the conversation. So it is about coming together and say, this is what we want to build. How are we going to do this? Get them into the conversation, get them to understand how their day-to-day life will change. What are the things that they can bring into the roles to be able to do this thing? And making that something that is not once said and then forgotten. This is what people don't like. This is why I mentioned transparency and authenticity, is that people don't like just being like, okay, this is the thing that we're going to do, and then the daily life experience is something different. You can empower people by doing and by leading by example. So go there, be like, this is what we're trying to do. Ask about their opinions, ask their thoughts, ask them, how can we do that in action? Make plans of how things might change internally or externally, the way we communicate, the way we behave, the way we make decisions. And then from that moment on, you need to lead by example and say, okay, now these are the things that every day we'll make sure that we do to continue to empower people.
Definitely. I guess people they need to be part of the process to have everybody on board, for sure. I've got a question. I guess personally, I've seen kind of purpose-driven business emerging a lot more over the past few years. People seem to be talking about it a lot more. It's obviously focused on in people's communications, and a lot of new businesses are starting out completely being purpose-driven or having purpose at their core. Again, there's not going to be a right answer to this. There's probably lots of different factors, but why do you think there's been that shift in attitudes? I know that, and what do you think the benefits are overall of being a purpose-driven organisation?
Great question. There's the two things that happen for me in terms of change in attitude, like these probably more. The first one is that we have a newest generation of entrepreneurs. So obviously, as I said before, there is the generational shift. We know that the end of the millennials, that generation, are a lot more interested in what's happening in the world, or more interested in solving these problems, and obviously the generation after. And the millennials are now becoming entrepreneurs. And this is the new generation. They see that as, okay, this is a vehicle for me to bring my values into that. So that's why we see a lot of companies. Obviously, a few people started that. Suddenly this becomes an option, going back to what I was saying before about, the leaders and role models. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I can actually do that. I can now see business as a vehicle for me to create that positive impact and create that change and solve this problem. So we managed to get to this point that we have this conversation. On the other hand is consumers. The world is changing. Consumers are looking at that. For me, it was very interesting when the pandemic hit, for example. And I remember that before even furlough was happening, was a conversation, everything, there was a hotel that immediately fired all their employees and said, you go, and they were actually staying in the hotel, the employees, so they were homeless and without a job in a day, because the hotel was like, well, the pandemic is not. And I remember the anger that people felt. It was like, you can see the comments, and it was like, once the pandemic is over, we should never go to that hotel. We should never do that. So the conversation has changed in terms of what consumers expect, when citizens expect from businesses the way to behave. They suddenly say like, this is not appropriate because they see other companies behaving in a different way. So that has impacted that as well. And I'll say in general, like the way the world is going, there's so many problems that we're facing that suddenly you realize that if you're not starting thinking about the long term, there's not going to be a long term. Climate emergency is a big one. You understand that what is happening might mean that, you know, it will be so bad that we really need to act now. And I always believe that business is the most powerful vehicle we have because of the money, because of how much you can do, because of the ownership you have to be able to create change and lobby change because business isn't being heard. So I think these are the three. Obviously, there's a lot more variables that come into place, but for me, these are the three big ones that change that conversation towards where we are now. And hopefully we're now in this tipping point that it just continues that way and it will become more and more and more the norm.
Definitely. Our next question from Lawrence in the Q&A that's come through is, how can a leader best engender trust within the organisation, the consumer and connected society?
What breaks trust is being lied to. So for me, that's kind of like one of the fundamentals. When humans experience trust, is that the moment someone says something and they don't do it, or the moment they say something and they do something else, is that when we start breaking this trust. So for me, this is the fundamental thread in what we're trying to build trust within organizations, with society, within consumers, is that don't do things just to do things. Don't do things just to say things that actually they're not true. I remember at some point in our business, we were saying all these good things, and our employees came and said, oh, you know what? You're not leading with your values. And it was a big hard stop for us to be like, okay, wait a second. This is all the things that we believe, but actually the way we act is different. And that can really break the trust within the company. So for me, transparency is the biggest one, is being there, being transparent in what you're trying to achieve, but also being transparent when you failed and when you make mistakes, and honor that. Don't try to hide and be like, I need to be perfect as a leader. I need to be perfect as a company. Being able to stand up and say, you know what, we never thought about this. It didn't cross our minds. It's embarrassing. It's not good. We should have, but we never did. So how can you tell us more? Before, when we were talking about putting our diversity pledge for our events, we ran an event. It was a very difficult event to run, and we were trying to find speakers, and we found the speakers, and it wasn't diverse. And we got a message from someone saying, you know what, this is inappropriate. You're talking about the future, but this is the future of business, and this is what you do. And we were like, oh yes, that's so true. People will say that, and kind of like we felt that. And our response was like, you know what, you're so right. Help us. And we start working with this person on how can we actually do that differently, because we don't know, because we can go as far as we can. So for me is being authentic and not being afraid to accept when you made a mistake, but being there to be able to say, but I want to do better. So I want to learn in a genuine way. If you don't want to do better, no, then that's a different conversation. But like, if you really want to do that, for me, it's about having these conversations, going to your team and say, I know that this was not ideal. I didn't want it to go that way. How can I make sure that never happens again?
Yeah, for sure. I think it goes a long way when somebody can actually admit when they got something wrong and look at how they can learn from it and communicate that, rather than just trying to brush it under the carpet and just pretend that they were right the whole time. So it definitely helps to foster that trust. I've got a final question before we wrap up, and that is, obviously yourself and the organisation have worked with loads of different businesses of all kind of shapes and sizes. You don't need to name any names, but I'm really interested to hear what has been the most kind of interesting organisation that you've worked with, or somebody that you've learned the most from personally in terms of what they've gone through as an organisation. Sorry to put you on the spot with that.
No. It's just kind of like, there's so many. I'm trying to. I think I'll say that there's definitely a lot of companies. I'm always love when I see the solutions that they come with, the definition that they come with. So there is a company that, I'll probably say this one, there is a company that is doing plant pots from, I'll get that right, but they discarded plastic in the oceans, and they discarded like seaweed and not seaweed, but kind of like from the fish nets and things like that. And for me, it's a brilliant story because the guy who runs the company was a diver, and he would experience like going diving professionally and then going out and kind of like having all this fish nets and kind of like trying to do that. He's like, we must do better. Like there's this bucket of things. And for me, it was amazing to see how that passion of we might need to do something created a plant pods where now are kind of like getting awards, and they're kind of like suddenly becomes a next big thing. So for me, is that what changes like that? People who see something and they hit them and they're like, oh, you know what? I want to create this change. There's a lot of organizations I learned from. I think the biggest learning for me was companies who were not working in that way, and then suddenly shifting their thinking and say, you know what, actually, I want to do things differently. And culture is a big thing that I love. So seeing companies, it's very difficult for me to answer with one company because there's so many and big combinations about things.
No, we're always amazed, particularly at the Chamber as well. Obviously, we work with so many businesses. Some of the amazing solutions that people can come up with for problems and turn it into, you know, a business idea or a project and solve some of these massive issues that we're facing. It's always really inspiring, and it always amazes me that people can think in that way and come up with these really creative ideas. So
that is, and I feel like this is why I feel privileged sometimes, because I feel like, you know, I'm in a room and I see all these different solutions that will make the world a better place. It's amazing to know, like, it feels like, okay, we're in safe hands, and maybe we're not, because there's so many problems in the world that we need to think about and change. But it's reassuring to know there's people who are working on those things, who are thinking creatively about how we can change those things.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff going on. Well, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of our session. It's been really interesting and fascinating to learn about your personal journey, but also about some of the learnings that you've taken from that and some of the businesses that you've worked with as well. So, and I really appreciate you getting up at well, very early doors to join us. So yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone else that has joined us to participate in the session and for all of your questions. The last thing for me is just to say that we have our next session actually starting in 30 minutes. So that is a panel discussion, and it's actually building on this, the discussion that we've just had here. So it's looking at what purpose-driven entrepreneurship means for the future of Scotland's economy. So again, very big question, very big topic. So our panelists will be joining us to discuss that in more detail, and it should be a very interesting session. So I encourage you to get along to that if you can. So thank you again, Zoe. It's been great, and